Good morning and welcome. We are back for another edition of our Let's Talk About Race series with myself, Keira Sorrells, the Executive Director of NICU Parent Network, and Gigi Khonyongwa-Fernandez, the Principal of GKF Coaching and Consulting and our NPN Board President. Gigi, it's so great to be back with you on this first Friday of the month. We no, we didn't miss you. We just did it earlier last month. It's all about
Yes,
flexibility and going with the flow sometimes, isn't it?
yes, yes. I'm having to really remember that today.
Yes. Yes, I know. Sometimes we have my kids are out for the summer now, and
Yes,
it's weird how, those instant changes in your everyday
yeah.
schedule just throw you off. It throws everybody off. Even my dogs are thrown off.
Like what's going on?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you had a great time in Munich at the
Yes.
ESPNI conference, which is fantastic. And so, what are we talking about today?
Do you know, I was just thinking, there um this whole arena of diversity and I always say like how long is a piece of string? There's so many elements
Yeah.
within it. And I think it's when you start thinking about it as an organization,
Mhm.
sometimes it can feel overwhelming because
Oh, for
either you
sure.
want to do, yeah, you want to do everything all at the same time, or you feel like I can't do anything because there's so much to do. And what I've been really sitting on, and I think this came up with the recent survey that you did, NPN did,
Mhm.
and it was really about slowing down a little bit and backtracking and getting some statistics around what is this
Mhm.
problem we're talking about, and then looking at some ways of how we can begin to go forward. And we've been talking about that, but I think we've been, um, you know, there's, like I said, there's so many elements to it that
Right.
I wanted to take a moment to pause and give the audience just a little bit more meat to chew on. I don't even know if that's the right term. It's Friday, so whatever comes out of my mouth, I'm sorry. Um, to begin to really kind of say for you, what is it we're talking about, and then to put some
Yeah.
numbers to it so you can kind of help to anchor you as an organization or as a hospital or as a leader, to begin to do this. And I guess the caveat of that as well is to not to help you not feel overwhelmed, and also to
Mm.
help um, you feel like you just got to take one step at a time, and those steps may be baby steps, but that's okay. It's a
Right.
step.
Right.
And yeah, so I think that was where I was today, was kind of taking a back step back and really looking at, not all, but some of the statistics, and then looking at
Mhm.
one or two very clear and very tangible um, evidence-based best practices that people could begin to start doing.
Yeah. I think I want to just take a moment to just kind of talk about some things that you just mentioned. And that is, you know, the need is so great. And there are so many issues at stake here, right? Um, that
Yeah.
are steeped in, centuries
Mm,
and years and years of racism and things that, you know, that can be really challenging, that are very complex. And just like you said, it can feel very overwhelming. And
mm,
like there's so much to do, you want to do it all at once. And then on the flip side of that, it can feel like, well, it's too big for me to even tackle. Why
mm,
bother?
mm,
And so I think I love your focus for today is, just to say, look, every step forward is a step forward. You're not going to change, systemic, historic racism
mhm,
and
mhm.
bias by yourself, but if you're doing your part in your sphere of influence, and, using
Yes.
your platform in the way that you can, then that's amazing
Mhm.
because no,
Yeah.
we're not going to change it all by ourselves. But
Yeah.
every little bit that you do, how you run your organization or run your
Mhm,
program,
mhm,
that's really what's important. And I think sometimes we can just get completely overwhelmed and wrapped up and think, oh my gosh, this is just too much for me to
mhm.
even think about.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah,
And because they're all interconnected, I think that's the thing. It's like there's not one reason why you have racism, racial inequality, discrimination. So I think each one of those streams or elements to it is big, and
yes,
so that's why it can be. But I think my mother used to always say, I don't even, she said something about an elephant, something about you can bite off, bite off. There is a method to this madness, something about you
right.
can only, I do listen to her, obviously, about you can only bite off one piece of the elephant or something to that effect. And I think it is really about understanding and
Mhm.
I've always heard that, you can change laws, but attitudes take centuries to change. And so I think
Mm,
you cannot change 400 plus eons of history overnight. But
right.
what, like you said, you can do is taking that step. And sometimes that first step that you take may be a few years.
Yes, yes. I think that's another really good point too, is because, we live in this society that is so used to instantaneous
Yes,
responses, instant
yes,
gratification, instant change. And,
mhm,
and if it's taken too long, then you're not doing a good job. And that's just not the case for something like this.
right.
I mean, changing the culture of your organization, addressing these very critical issues, especially in healthcare and in the NICU space, you know, it's something that you just have to keep doing. It's like we've always said about being intentional and not just doing a tick
Yeah,
box or a check box. Yes, check boxes, that takes an instant to do, but
yeah, yeah,
real, attitude shifts, culture change, organizational
mhm,
development and growth, that takes a lot of time. And if you're not going fast enough for somebody else, well, that's their problem. That's not yours. This is what you're doing for your organization and your community.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I guess that the thing is you know, that goes into what we're going to talk about today is the why. So why are
Right.
we even talking about it?
Yeah.
So what's the point? Like what is, I
Right.
mean, and that can, I think it's important to ask that because sometimes we can hear these things so often and then we kind of become desensitized to it because like, oh,
Mhm.
it's race again or ethnicity again or
Right.
whatever again.
Yeah.
And I think in order to not do that, what I was sharing with you earlier is that, I mean, there've been lots of studies, but it was a study in 2021, and it was entitled "Unequal Care," and it's talking about
Hmm.
specifically the racial and ethnic disparities in the NICU.
Hmm.
And I think we'll probably share the link too, because I think it's worth
Hmm.
reading for all
Yeah.
of us to just, and that's one of many. There are several that are talking about this. And even within NPN, we have members or who are focusing on the inequities within healthcare, and we have partners also as
Hmm.
well. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of resources out there that you could begin to start using. But I wanted to pull up this one because it was the most recent. It was a recent one, but it kind of helps to answer some of the questions around the why.
Hmm.
And several points they brought up, but I wanted to highlight three. And one, it says compared to, this is straight from the study, was compared to white infants, Black infants are twice as likely to be born preterm, and they're more likely to experience serious complications when they are delivered preterm. And then 70% of, and this is wild to me, 70% of neonatal deaths are predominantly Black. Particularly those preterm infants that have very low birth weight. So that's one why. Um, and then the second, I don't know if you want me to go through the three and then we can have a chat about it.
Yeah, I'm just
Um,
gonna, as you mention these statistics, I'm gonna put them in the chat box as you
okay,
go.
okay,
So yeah.
all right. And then the other thing that was highlighted was the neonatal outcomes. There were huge disparities in the neonatal outcomes for three specific ethnic groups, and it was Hispanic, Native American, and Puerto Ricans, in addition to the Black population. So it just the disparities were even more elevated with these groups as well, with not just and the outcomes. I think that's very important because it's their survival rate, but also it's what happens in the NICU, and then what are the outcomes once they leave the NICU. And so it's that kind of that understanding that stream, outcome stream, if that's such a word, to where we have to look at all those elements to it. So it's about, when they come in, before they come to the NICU, when they're in the NICU, during the NICU, when they leave the NICU, and all those outcomes, the disparities amongst those are huge among those groups. And then the last one, which I think again goes to kind of, you touched on, you said the word systems, Keira, was neonatal intensive care delivery has been shown to be both segregated and unequal. Black and Hispanic infants are at risk of receiving care at lower quality NICUs and worse care within the NICU. So parts of that system aspect is that if you are in a more deprived area, you live in a more deprived neighborhood, your services are going to be more deprived. Not always, but sometimes there. So you're gonna, you probably will have to go to a NICU that is probably not as doesn't have as many things, or if you probably even have a NICU in your area, you're having to travel to another space. And so take a moment to read that and other articles, because I think it will help you when you start to discuss with your organization, discuss with your hospitals, why we have to put such an emphasis, why we have to put such a continued emphasis on mitigating some of these disparities, some of these inequalities, is having the evidence behind you to show this is why. It's unacceptable to have anybody, any group, but particularly these most vulnerable babies. It's unacceptable for you to have those kind of high numbers. For 70% of Black babies we just expect them to die more than white babies. It's like, where's the humanity in that? And where's the, just doesn't make sense to me. So that helps to kind of create your picture, is to just show that there's these huge gaping holes that need to be addressed. But one of the things article says, and it goes to what you said, and it also happens a lot in just the world of D&I, diversity, inclusion, and equity, is this idea of a systems approach, in that in order to begin to address those issues, you have to look at it systematically. So you cannot just look at one sort of element to it. You have to sort of look and see what's going on. And then that helps you begin to be able to map out where your first step is. I don't know if we're able to.
We can show the table.
Yes, can we show the table?
Yep, we can add that.
So
are you
one
able
of the
to see
things,
that?
Yeah, let's see if I can see that. Yeah. I've lost you now. I don't see you. But can you see it? Is it showing up?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's the table 1 talking about readiness, recognition, response, and systems learning. That was the table you wanted, right?
Yeah. Okay. And so, yes, I see it now. Yeah. And so one of the solutions that they talk about as one sort of first step, and if you can look at this as a first step, is to begin to look at kind of where you are. We've talked about this before, like taking a pulse check, but they suggest, and this is also suggested in other ways, in other realms as well, is to look at it from a system. And so they look at your readiness, your recognition, and your response, and your learning as an organization or as a hospital. How do you do that? And
Mhm.
so these are some of the things they encourage you to do. So look, let's take about the first one. So the first one is about your organizational acculturation to address these needs, and that the needs of the diverse population that you serve. And that's really your cultural readiness of your organization. Are they even able to have these conversations?
Mhm.
And it sounds silly, but if they're just not there yet, you're hitting a brick wall. And so maybe it's about, how do we begin to change the language to where it makes sense for them? What are the common things we can kind of come together on? Otherwise, you run the risk of being in two separate camps, and we don't want that when you're trying to. So that's number one, is
Mhm.
around is testing the culture of your organization. So where are they with that?
Mhm.
Um, what kind of science do you have? What kind of materials do you have? Do you have it just in English? Do you have it in other languages?
Mhm.
Do you have a council board, and
Mhm.
do you have translation services? Those are some of the things they were talking about.
Right.
And that could be, so you can use this table as one of your first steps in the whole world of D&I. One of the things we talk about is auditing. So, and this is kind of it, like trying to figure out where you are currently as an organization, as a hospital in these areas.
Mhm.
So that was something that you can begin to start doing. You were going to say something. I think I cut you off.
No, go ahead.
Okay, all right.
I just have a little
Um,
tickle in my throat, so.
sorry. Okay. And then what I would suggest, though, is instead of trying to do all strategies in each of those domains or those areas,
Mhm.
is to just look at one.
Mhm.
So one
Right.
in readiness, and just see where you are.
Mhm.
Um, you can kind of begin to look at the recognition. I think sometimes, I mean, some people they've done it two ways. I've seen people do it where they've taken one out of each one and kind of,
Mhm.
started from there.
Mhm.
Some have just stuck in one domain initially and just kind of figure out, where are we now? So they'll look at the
Mhm.
first one first. So
Right.
you can play around with it. So because maybe you're further along, or maybe you've just started, or
Mhm.
maybe you just in your head you're thinking about it.
Right.
As an organization, you can choose which one feels right for you. But I guess the thing is, I mean, what I would suggest is that you do that pulse check first, whether that be in the form of an
Yeah.
audit, be a form of a survey, be a form of, less where we are as a culture, as an organizational
Right.
culture.
Yeah. And that seems to make the most sense too, that you would do kind of that needs assessment, gap analysis, of where you are at the moment. It just seems like that would be the natural first step.
Yeah, but it's not. It is, but a lot of people don't, because
Mhm.
what they try to do is try to do everything all at once. And when
Right.
you do that needs analysis for your organization, where you are, it prevents you from being. It sounds really awful, but prevents you from being like just going with the trend.
Yeah.
And it makes
Right.
you really, really look at it and say, okay, where are we, and where do we need to go?
Right. Yeah.
Um, you know,
So we would encourage that first
yes,
step to be an
yes,
audit or, needs assessment, you
yes,
know, because
and,
that
and
also gives you a chance to look to evaluate your capacity for,
yes,
the
yes.
next steps, so that your next steps don't fall flat, so that your next steps have some, some teeth to them.
Yes. And one of the things I would encourage, and there are organizations out that do this, you could partner up with other organizations that are already doing it, or
Mhm.
there are groups, there are diversity groups who will come into organizations and do audits for you. And
Mm.
some people like to do that because it's a
Yep.
very objective approach, because oftentimes we
Mhm.
don't see what we don't see because
Sure.
it's in our camp, and it's like, okay, well,
Right.
we got it together. But
Right.
sometimes having that objective eye coming in, they don't have any connection with your organization, other than they're wanting you to support you in this area. They can
Right.
be able to see some of the things that maybe we don't see, and also be able to guide you on the direction you go. So that's another option, if you have the budget for it. Some I've noticed people go in together and they do it together. So
Mhm.
that could be an option.
And there are, I don't know specifically, but I do know that there obviously is still a very high interest in, um, funding opportunities related to
Oh,
disparities. And so
yes.
this may be, a grant opportunity for your organization. So you don't have to look at your budget and say, oh, we don't have the money to do that. Like there are opportunities out there that could
Yes.
provide the funding so that your organization can do that first step of readiness, and
Yes.
build that into your proposal. Don't just jump right into the tactical things, but make
Yes.
sure that that first step of your proposal is a needs assessment.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. And that was something before we close. I was going to say that's a really good point. I like sort of thinking outside the box and saying, look, there are grants are there. There are other ways that can help you to get these things done. And one of the things that came out of this study as well was looking at when you began to take these first steps is looking at things from a technical point of view, but also a relational point of view. So relational would be how do we communicate? How do you actually engage with the families? What are your training like? So it's kind of those softer skills versus also the technical things of are you providing the same type of interventions to all your babies across your
Right.
NICU? So it's making sure you have both of those in a needs assessment, or I've heard it also being called a diversity audit or equity audit. Whatever you call it, it's just a matter of making sure you identify where you are now on that. Yeah, starting off with that. Are we ready to even tackle this
Hmm.
as a
Right.
hospital, as an organization,
Hmm.
and where are we on those lines, on those steps,
Right.
in our readiness?
Yeah. All right. So let's move on to that second domain, recognition.
Yeah. So the recognition bit is really about looking at what the SDH, so the social determinants of health. What are your families coming in to the hospital with before? I mean, coming into the NICU with, and so understanding their lives beforehand will help you provide better care. um, if you're having someone who is not living close to the hospital, the fact that they're having to come in, through bus or other means to try to get to the hospital,
Right.
um, and I think it's very important for the staff to understand that, so the judgment and bias doesn't occur.
Yes.
Okay, why is that parent not here, for example, and being able to provide services, and it talks about here like psychosocial services and support and counseling to those families.
Hmm. Right.
And that's a big one, because it's what we hear sometimes is families, Black and brown families feel like they have to show up differently
Mm-hmm.
within the NICU. They have to watch their language. They have to,
Mm-hmm.
even if they can't, they have to feel like I have to be there. I was just speaking to a mother this week that she said the same thing. I felt like I had to be there because if
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't there, I was going to be judged.
Right, right. No matter
And
what
so
might be going on at home or what she or they have to deal with at home in order to make it possible for them to be there.
in order to be
It's
there,
just,
so that
yeah.
exactly, so recognizing that piece, recognizing what's happening before the NICU, because that also will help you be able to understand the outcomes better, what's going to happen when they leave the NICU. So that
Right.
recognition piece. And then the third domain is looking at the response. So beginning to look at how you are. So if you have your peer-to-peer groups, if you're having, looking at your language, looking at, all the things the communication piece, how are you responding you know, to what you found out already through your readiness and through your
Right.
recognition? What are you actually doing? And I like the first one when it talks about activities that target disparities, and that's very, very
Mhm.
important. That
Mhm.
if you don't water it down. So if
Right.
you're targeting, um, your Black population, you target the Black population. If you're targeting your Hispanic population, you target it because sometimes because their needs are different, could potentially be different than
Right.
others. So making sure that you're clear on the audience that you're speaking to.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then the the last part is looking at from a systems point of view, is
Mm,
that you are looking at what's happening technically, what's happening with our communication, what's happening with our our social services, what's happening, all those kind of, we're looking at all those things. And I love the last part about which goes back to what we were saying earlier, you don't have to do it by yourself. Like, you can partner
right.
with other
Yes.
community-based organizations.
Right.
One of our members, I think, does this really, really well,
Hmm.
Sauce Light, that does a lot of partnering with hospitals and milk banks. And I saw
Hmm.
something over on LinkedIn the other day about partnering with food trucks and like
Right.
anything that's in your community that's going to help better support families who have who are struggling.
Right. Yes,
um
absolutely. Really tapping into those community-based
yes,
organizations because,
yes.
particularly if if we're talking about a hospital and a
Mhm.
unit, they may be very just insular in terms of
Yes,
what their hospital system provides, and making sure that you're looking to what the community out there is
yes,
providing, because
yes,
that will just expand what your unit can assist the families with. They have a really good finger on the pulse of what the community needs and how those needs are being addressed. So we really
yes,
you know
yes,
can't advocate for that enough, is that
yes. And
partnering
what
and
it
collaboration.
exactly, and what that does is it establishes trust,
Yes.
which we know oftentimes the mistrust or distrust is,
Hmm.
it, kind of can make those barriers or those inequities even bigger than they already are. But if you
Right.
already have a community group that is, I mean, they know
Yes.
what's happening, and then
Yes.
working with them genuinely, not just to kind of take a tick box, but really
Right.
getting in and working together. That helps to build, you're building on that trust, you're developing trust, but you're building on that trust so that
Yeah.
the outcomes will improve.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I
So
think
I mean,
this has just been, what's that?
no, no, I was gonna say, I hope that was helpful, because I think I wanted to make sure that, everyone listening had something to go on, that they can, and you
Yes.
can always tweak that to make it make sense for you,
Sure.
to identify which one of those domains, which one of those strategies are relevant to where you are. But at
Hmm.
least beginning to understand, I can do this. This is why I'm doing this. And I always go back to, why are we doing it? Because
Yes.
your why maybe for your community may be slightly different, or maybe, um, I don't know, maybe exactly the same, but at least having
Hmm.
those connections all the time.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think this has been just a really great overview. And I did put the link to this
Oh, good.
study um, in the chat. So please take a look at that. That's where you'll find the table and you'll find the discussion of the study. And, again, just connecting to the why are we doing this? What is the evidence for doing this
Yes.
besides it just makes common sense?
Yes. Yes, but we know common sense isn't common. So
No. Exactly, exactly. And I would just go back to encouraging our leaders out there, to try not to get you know discouraged because
yeah.
the issues are so big and so long standing and will be with us for a long time, and just recognize that you can do your bit,
Yeah.
and it matters. You don't change the world in a day. um,
Yeah.
there's no way that that happens, but doing your part, whether that is internally with your organization, whether that's
Yes.
externally in partnerships, or whatever that looks like for you, it matters, and it does, and it will make a difference.
Yes, totally agree. 100% agree.
Well, I think that that is a beautiful way to stop and end our conversation for today. Really, just I love the study. I love the table. Just really tangible takeaways for everybody. And we want to know how you're doing, and
Mhm.
how are you able to take some steps with your organization to change the culture, to make an impact in these DE&I areas? So with that, Gigi, thank you so much. It's
Thank
always lovely to
you.
see you and spend some time with you on Friday, the first Friday of the month.
Yes,
Um, and again, we are here. If anybody has additional questions or wants additional resources, you can always reach out to us through the NICUParentNetwork.org website. And Gigi and I are always happy to help you find the answer.
definitely.
All right. Well,
Thank
have a great rest of
you.
your day.